Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. First question's for Administrator Abbott. You said that when you look at reconstruction of the bridge, you'll look at current standards consistent with law. Does the current law allow, in this a circumstance like this, a rebuild of a different kind of bridge in order to be eligible for either federal or for the cost share? Because you could build one under current standards, and that could be in violation of what the law under this circumstance allows you to do. So can you walk through that a little bit?
Thank you for the question, sir. Yeah, I think what we're examining and working with Maryland DOT on, the original bridge was built in the 1970s, a truss bridge, which was common at the time. Today, most of the bridges that are being replaced that are truss bridges are being replaced by cable stay bridges. Different standards. Obviously, we're going to want to hear from the NTSB on their final results of that investigation. But under the law, what we want to do is when we're replacing a structure of that size, we want to build it to current standards, and Maryland DOT will be allowed to do that. What we want to make sure we're not doing is allowing for any quote-unquote betterments that did not exist that would be then covered by the ER program.
Yeah, okay. Admiral Gautier, the Corps has expended significant resources in the recovery effort. There's no mechanism for the Coast Guard has. There's no mechanism for the Coast Guard to recoup that funding, and you're not typically reimbursed for this kind of work. Yet, with a workforce shortage of about 10%, you're downgrading stations within the Coast Guard, not because of this incident, but that's just what's happening in the Coast Guard. We passed a Coast Guard authorization that gets us to $14.5 billion for 25 and $15 billion for 26. So we're not near the goal of a $20 billion service for 2030. So just as Congress moves forward with supplemental appropriations for the Key Bridge, how is the Coast Guard thinking about being part of that supplemental appropriation to get reimbursed for get some cost recovery for your work?
Yeah, thanks, Ranking Member. And I don't want to get ahead of the administration on the plans or the amounts and so on, the details of the supplemental. But the way you've articulated, first of all, we have been expending operating funds as we do during emergencies like this, like we do for hurricane responses and other things. And we've been keeping close tabs on those. And so far, we've spent about $20 million of direct and indirect funding on this particular response. But what we see in events like this and others like it is that we do what we call burn readiness, right? So we have to have other assets around the area work harder and to cover for the boats, aircraft, people who are working these. We've mobilized now, when I visited the command post, on average, we've had about 200 individuals at the peak in the command post per day. That's gone down. We're mobilizing them from around the country. In fact, most of them are from outside Baltimore right now, and so there's an opportunity cost from the commands that provide those individuals. And I think what this exposes, sir, and you know us well, is that the Coast Guard readiness is becoming more and more brittle as we fail to have the kind of consistent budgets reaching that $20 billion a year that the Coast Guard's articulated, reaching the $3 billion per year on our procurement, construction, and improvement, double what we actually receive in order to do the necessary capitalizations. And so this brittleness in our readiness manifests in a whole bunch of different ways, and we really do appreciate congressional support and ask for additional support for appropriations in the future.
Yeah, thanks. General Graham, now to you, kind of the same question, but last week the Corps reprogrammed $20 million in unused funds from FY 2020, including $1 million out of my district, and from prior year funds. Do you have an estimate how many more dollars you might need to reprogram, first? And second, how are you thinking about a supplemental appropriation for cost recovery for the Corps?
Ranking Member Larsen, thank you for that question. Similar to the Coast Guard, we certainly want to get ahead of the administration, but right now we've been able to use the project funds, and as your opening statement indicated, that dredging work that we had planned to do with those funds in this year will still need to be done. The emergency reprogramming that I referenced in my opening statement, most of that money we didn't need. So where does that money come from? Mainly, it's bid savings. A lot of these projects had happened during times of COVID when it was a very favorable bid environment, and we were able to go back to those funds. A good example of what some of that might be, a contractor might put a claim on a project, a request for equitable adjustment, and a few years later, those claims have been adjudicated, and if we didn't have to pay that request, then we would unobligate those funds.
Mr. Chairman, if I could indulge me for a moment, not for a question, but I do want to let Chair Hamidi know, I'll need to absorb your first half of your report. It's rather technical. I'm not an engineer, but we'll absorb it and get back to you with some questions on it. And just as a data point for the committee, the Skagit River Bridge collapse in 2013 cost a total of $19 million for the insurer and took us 10 years to recover $19 million. So we should not be thinking of waiting to recover costs from insurance, the insurer of the carrier or the bridge or whatever in order to pay for it. It's going to have to take place first because it took 10 years to get $19 million. If that's the average time it gets $19 million, we'll all be dead by the time we get the money back from this ocean carrier. So just a data point for folks. Thanks.
Mr. Crawford.